So first up, it's on lots of the front pages. Actually, President Putin has agreed to the idea of a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, but he very much wants it in his own terms. So, indeed, Anne, has he agreed anything? Not really.
No. I mean, he agrees that a ceasefire is a nice idea, and that's about it. I mean, he's not given any specific reactions, at least not so far. So we don't quite know exactly what his terms are going to be. But I think we can imagine for a start that he will want to keep what he's already got. I think that he will probably refuse to have any European forces keeping peace in Ukraine. So I imagine that in the end, he will probably say no. And then the very big question is, where do we go from there?
Well, President Trump, Kevin, has said that he has lots of things that he could do. I think he's referring to sanctions. He could really hurt Russia. What those sanctions exactly are, we don't quite know. Some people suspect that it could be to do with natural resources, gas and oil, of course, that Russia is very dependent on. But where do we go next?
Yeah, well, it's going to be a test for Trump now because he effectively flipped the US from the side of Ukraine onto Russia by halting arms supplies, withdrawing intelligence, humiliating Zelensky in the White House, bullying allies and praising Putin, saying, look, it was Ukraine started the war, blamed them when they were invaded, calling Zelensky the dictator when he's elected, and the dictator is Putin. It's a big challenge for him, but it's a classic negotiating position of saying yes, but. And a yes, but means no.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll come to some of the big issues in just a second, but just looking at the way this part of the negotiation is happening. So Steve Witkoff, he's Trump's representative, if you like, which is unusual. I mean, we should say Steve Witkoff's a businessman, he's not an elected official.
He's a state agent.
He's essentially Trump's golf partner. They've been golfing since the 80s together. But he hasn't sent General Kellogg. He hasn't sent Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, to Russia. And Steve Witkoff has now left Moscow, he's left the embassy, without actually having sat down with the Russian officials. We don't even know if he's had any talk. So, Anne, is this, if it's going to be solved, is it going to be solved between Putin and Trump on the phone, basically?
I mean, always with this sort of a negotiation, you get the non-principals doing it first so that they can get some idea of what is wanted and all the rest of it. Then they advise their principals, in this case, Trump. And so that isn't so unusual. But yes, you're quite right. In the end, that's exactly what it's going to come down to. It will be Putin and Trump. And as I say, if Putin does say no, where are we? I mean, you can talk about sanctions. They've already got an awful lot of sanctions. Where are we in terms of the future of Ukraine? Because at the moment, the Russians are winning the war.
You look at Putin. He's president, a gangster president of Russia. The Russian economy is smaller than the British economy. Russia is no longer the global superpower it was in the Soviet Union days, but Putin wants to rebuild Russia as a force like that. He wants to be seen sitting as an equal with Trump, preferably in the Kremlin, Trump having to go to Russia. I'm sure he'd accept going to Saudi Arabia or the US, as long as he is seen as an equal. But what will that mean for Ukraine? Zelensky wants the war to end. Of course he wants the war to end. He's losing so many of his people, smaller country than Russia. He hasn't got as many young men he can see killed and maimed. But he wants some of his territory back, and he wants guarantees that if there is a ceasefire, Russia won't just re-equip and then push on.
Which ironically, that's what President Zelensky was shouted down for saying at the Oval Office. But ironically, this is what President Putin's been saying in the last 48 hours is Ukraine going to use this 30-day period to rearm and come back? They're both saying the same thing. The difference being that we know from history, and it is a fact, that Putin has broken every single agreement that he has signed.
Well, including the the agreements with Ukraine in the past, including when
the
Ukraine
Minsk
gave up.
agreement,
But and earlier than that, when they gave up nuclear weapons. But Russia is advancing very slowly and incrementally and taking more Ukrainian territory, beginning to get back the little toehold that Ukraine had in Russia. He's winning slowly because he can pour more people into what effectively is a meat grinder.
And how do we find that common ground? For weeks now, you've had this Keir Starmer. There's a big meeting again with all the big heads of state in Europe that Keir Starmer is going to chair, the coalition of the willing that we've heard.
Yep.
But Putin has said, I'm not going to accept any NATO or any other foreign armies, boots on the ground in Ukraine. I want to keep the almost 20% of territory that I've taken from Ukraine, and I want it recognized as Russian. Is there ever going to be any common ground to find a peace deal?
I would have thought it unlikely, I have to say. I mean, I don't know quite what would put pressure on Putin to A, cede any of the ground that he's won, or B, accept any, I carefully said earlier, European rather than NATO, but any non-Ukrainian presence in Ukraine. I don't see, at the moment, at any rate, I don't see what the outcome can possibly be that will save Putin's face. And if you don't save Putin's face, he ain't going to agree.
Well, also, there's the issue of saving Trump's face, of course, because from the very beginning, it was, I've spoken to Vladimir Putin, he wants to end the war. We were given to understand that there was some sort of understanding. Perhaps this understanding now is not quite there, but a tense weekend ahead, I fear.